Last week, the U.S. House voted to approve a measure called the, quote, Enforce the Law for Sanctuary Cities Act. And Santa Fe is one of those so-called sanctuary cities targeted by this legislation. Now, these cities have policies that direct local law enforcement to not ask people about their immigration status. The proposed legislation would cut federal funding for cities like Santa Fe that have these policies. And Dan, what are we trying to solve here with this legislation? You're not in the Congress certainly, but what's going on here that makes folks say, look, if you don't do this, you're not going to get this kind of money? What are we trying to solve
Well,
here?
I think, the power of the purse is the way you can make changes happen. The reality is we've had this push from local entities, cities, counties, states, to say we're going to ignore federal law. We're going to fight this. We don't agree with it. So they've taken a stance to say our policy is we're not going to do this. There's been some discussion nationally. I think some folks like to give the impression that, before these sanctuary cities came along, the police were knocking on people's doors and saying, what country are you from? Oh, you're not from here, we're arresting you. I think the reality is that we know just in the last year, over 17,000 illegal immigrants with criminal records were released. Of those 17,000, 8,000, the federal government said, we want these guys. And sanctuary cities said, no, we're not turning them over. And so I think what we're seeing now is people are saying, wait a minute, we don't want police going around asking for green cards and asking why you're here and asking what you're doing. We get that part of it. But when you catch someone and they have violated a law, we are a nation of laws. We have to enforce the laws. And so I think the feds are starting to say, and folks are starting to say, because it's interesting, if you read some of the stuff, the Washington Examiner had a report that there's even some folks that within the Obama administration are saying, yeah, we got to fix this. This really isn't working the way people think it should work in some places. So I think the feds are saying, look, we're going to try to get you back. The Congress is saying, we're going to try to get people back to understanding we are a country of laws. We have to follow those laws. And if you choose not to follow those laws, our only action as Congress is we're going to withhold money that we're normally giving you. And there's no greater way to get a politician's attention than take money from them.
Laura Sanchez-Rivey, a lot of this kicked off with that very unfortunate situation in San Francisco where the undocumented person had been deported 5 times and he shot that poor woman and she passed away, and this really sort of lit this off. There's something about this sanctuary city thing that sends people either wildly one way or the other. There's a moral stand that Santa Fe is trying to say that says, look, if there's felony crimes, of course we're going to call ICE. Of course we're going to do that. We don't want felons walking around. But we're not going to call ICE if these folks are, have a traffic violation.
Right.
Or in some cases, domestic violence situations where both, man and woman gets hauled in and then someone's being deported. Is this not just a reasonable middle ground? Because Santa Fe is one of about 200 cities that's doing this right now.
Well, and one of the issues in the domestic violence example is that you don't want to chill, have a chilling effect on people wanting to report domestic violence.
Right.
That's the real issue, is that if you know that, if the victims in particular know that they're going to be, immigration is going to be called, ICE is going to be called, or whoever, that then they won't be reporting the domestic abuse. And that's a serious problem in terms of just overall community health.
Sure.
To some of what Dan said about, we want the criminals, ICE agents have the ability to still, police and do what they need to do, go after these criminals, people that they're charged with actually, arresting these folks and so detaining them. What we're talking about is not having local police serve as their agents in doing this, and I have to bring up the Arizona example where they've gone, the full other extreme, where on a typical traffic stop or any other law enforcement issue that comes up where they're interacting with the public, they basically can ask for immigration status and, and deal with that. That has a serious impact on the police's ability to actually deal with the community, have a good relationship, and actually be able to help police in the way that they should be policing. Not doing the ICE agent's job, the federal agents' jobs, but doing their own community policing.
Let me ask you this though. In fact, is that not what the federal government is asking them to do? Saying, we're giving you a ton of money, 6 figures worth of money, $600,000 over the last couple of years for Santa Fe. Isn't the city in de facto becoming an extension of the federal government by accepting that money?
I don't think they're an extension of the federal government. I think they're still, obviously, states get funding for stuff too. I don't think that taking funding from the federal government makes them an extension. No, any funding funding does tend to come with certain, restrictions, their mandates essentially. So they have to follow through with that. But to call it an extension, I think really devalues the sovereignty that the states have. They have a certain amount of autonomy.
Right.
They're not sovereign nations in the same way that tribes are. But I wouldn't call them, just for accepting certain federal funding, an extension of the federal government.
Okay.
But they do have a lot of obligations that they have to follow up with, and it's contingent upon them doing
Sure,
so
sure.
to get that funding.
Yeah. Diane, in fact, what they're doing is a don't ask, don't tell policy.
Correct.
They're leaving it up to the discretion and the judgment of the officer in the field. Again, if it's edging towards a felony, they're obligated to report these kind of things.
Correct.
So it's not as if Santa Fe is walking away from their obligations completely. So is this punishment a little, or in other cities like Santa Fe, is this punishment too much, withholding funds because of that?
My concern is that there are some cities that are much more stringent about, it's not a don't ask, don't tell, it's just we're not telling you anything.
Gotcha.
Whereas, and so to me, that impedes the process of making sure we don't have the felons out on the street.
Right.
And we don't have the situation like we did in California.
Mm-hmm.
But as you say, a traffic ticket, I mean, I'm sorry. I think that's a little too much. First of all, we wouldn't do that to most people.
Right.
And I think that we should be very careful about what we're doing. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
If the city person knows that this is a felon
Mm-hmm.
or that the guy's been deported 5 times, I mean, it's pretty obvious that something needs to be done and an alert sent up. But I'm talking about an alert. It's not, I don't think they're responsible for doing the arresting.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like Laura said, it becomes ICE's responsibility to take that over and do it. I believe that when you come to sanctuary cities or communities, the top priority of the local enforcement has to be the public safety. We have to make sure that our citizens are safe. Other than that, then we move into the area of they're breaking the law. It's the law, as Dan said. They're breaking the law. So then it moves into a different realm. But if you're a felon and you're a danger and a threat to our community and our citizens, then I think local government has a greater responsibility. And I believe that Santa Fe is doing everything they can to comply with that. They're just not going heavy-handed into the process.
Exactly. Rachel, Congressman Pierce was for the legislation. Mr. Lujan was not, and our CD1 representative did not vote on this particular one.
Why?
I don't know why, actually. And it's a tough spot for folks, though. It really is a difficulty because, as Diane was pointing out, there's a lot of local decisions made here, but the connection to the federal government is undeniable here. There has to be some kind of relationship. I don't think anybody would advocate a complete separation of law enforcement and ICE, saying you're on your own, ICE, you got to
Right.
patrol the streets or whatever the case may be. But where's the middle ground here? And I think the money thing is an issue, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
As we all talk about it in all these different ways, the one thing that I keep coming back to is the differences among communities and how people feel on this issue. They're huge, even within a state, and even within what you might call sanctuary cities. Different cities are handling things very differently. So I see this as that battle playing out. Should communities have that right to have those variations, or is it going to be all controlled at the federal level?
We've got a letter from Mayor Gonzalez and the fire chief and the safety, everybody in Santa Fe saying to the delegation, we do not support this. We think it'll be detrimental to our job of catching people, if that's what your goal is. How impactful do you think that is when you've got, we have to assume they're reflecting the community's will. When you've got that many people on a letter like that.
You do have the community's will, but as we've said too, that draw of federal funding and the impact that has on local law enforcement is a very powerful driver too. I mean, everyone's balancing those.
Yeah, Laura, what do you think about that? That letter that went to our congressional folks from
Well,
the
I
Santa
think
Fe people.
it's pretty significant. I mean, I think it's important that there were so many members of law enforcement that signed it. And I think that they're, in the best position to be able to say how this will impact them, to be forced to do this. I do think that the funding is a big deal, and but it's not unlike other type of legislation that's passed, strong arming, so to speak, localities to do certain things. It always is contingent upon a certain mandate. And I think that what's troubling, especially what's going on right now with the presidential campaign, and the Democrats now have taken to calling this the Donald Trump Act because it's sort of, it's coming at a time where we see so many people, supporting Trump despite some of the comments that he's made. And, that's very frustrating. So I think in some ways, it seems opportunist that people are jumping on this right now, on the heels of this terrible tragedy in San Francisco, which of course nobody condones, and I think everybody feels the same way about how terrible that was. But then, coming on the heels also of the comments that Donald Trump has made, this just seems to be this rush to change things right now and capitalize on that.
Any upshot for 2016 presidential race on this? Is this going to relight immigration?
I think it's a big issue. I think it's clearly, I have a son that goes to school in Tucson, and the immigration issue, regardless of the way you stand, it's bankrupting the city of Tucson. I mean, their hospitals, they can't exist. They don't have the workforce. They can't get the things done. And Laura's right. It's a shame if people are taking a single opportunity, one single case. The problem is across this country, there's hundreds of cases annually, from the young quarterback at the University of Colorado that was hit by 2 illegal immigrants, is now brain damaged in a wheelchair the rest of his life, that were multiple criminals. They committed multiple crimes prior to this, and they weren't deported. This is not everybody likes to say, well, this is the Donald Trump, and this is, the problem is I think people are really starting to look at this and saying, we have an immigration problem, and this constant pandering by both sides. We're going to get so tough that we're going to run everybody out, we're going to do nothing. I think the majority of people in the middle are saying, we're done listening to that. We have to have serious immigration reform. We have to do something. It's affecting us financially, it's affecting our security, and we've got to do something right about it. And I think that's why Donald Trump's getting the listen that he's getting into. Not that I agree with him, but he's getting a lot of play.
I hear you. Up next, we discuss the announcement this week that the police chief in Santa Fe is retiring after just over 1 year in that role.